When creating a holistic anti-fraud program, it's obviously more important to prevent as many frauds as you can than it is to detect them after they have begun happening. Some of the best things to do from a fraud prevention perspective are to make sure that all employees are well educated, completely aware, provide targeted training about what fraud means to them and how they can help protect the organization from fraud. But beyond that, there are more targeted things that you should incorporate. Things like audits. Maybe it's a full audit, maybe it's just some sort of comprehensive evaluation periodically can both help in terms of knowing where your risks are and also sends a message to employees that somebody is looking for those things, which can help prevent fraud from happening to begin with. Building in additional internal controls as well, making sure no employees have access to steal something and then also cover that up is incredibly important. And that can be hard in small organizations or in small departments, but wherever you're able to, making sure that the person that has access to a resource is not also the person that approves transactions about that resource or the final person that's reconciling or signing off on approval for things. That's a really important way to prevent fraud from happening. If somebody can do both of those things, if they can commit the fraud and then conceal what they did, that makes it so much more likely that they might exploit that opportunity down the road. Research shows that the top way frauds are detected is through tip, and that most of those tips come from internal employees. They're wonderful resources, and we need to make sure they are both educated, but also have paths to report any concerns they have. If you have a whistleblower program, that's great. It can be really important to provide multiple avenues for people to bring their reports forward, whether it's a telephone hotline, even just having a manager that they can go talk to behind closed doors where they can share their concerns and feel protected and feel valued in terms of what they've brought forward. That can go a long way. When we're looking for potential fraud, we talk a lot about red flags or warning signs, and those can appear in a lot of different places. There might be red flags in your data that show where transactions really stand out from other transactions and they don't look right. One of the most interesting for me personally is behavioral red flags. Fraud, as we say, is a human problem, not an accounting problem. So while you need to look for red flags in the books and records of your organization, there are also warning signs that can happen on the human side in how people show up and in their behavior. One of the most common behavioral red flags we see in fraud schemes, especially involving employees, is someone living beyond their means. Somebody might be driving a car that's more expensive than what they should be able to afford on their salary, or taking extravagant trips, or basically just looking like they have a much more luxurious lifestyle than what you would expect. That doesn't necessarily mean they're committing fraud, but it does happen an awful lot in fraud cases. And really what we're looking for is the totality of those red flags altogether. You don't ever want to chase one red flag and say that absolutely means fraud is happening. But when you're looking at something in the data doesn't look right, some documents don't look right, and this person is acting suspiciously in certain ways, that is a good indicator that you probably have something you need to look a little bit more closely at. At some point, almost every organization is going to find themselves in the unfortunate situation of, we think fraud is happening. It's really important that you have a plan in place before you get to that point. You don't want to find yourself having to craft a response plan real time once something has occurred. What does a response plan look like? That means, how do you make sure that any allegations or any concerns that have been brought forward are legitimate? Who is responsible for overseeing the response? Who needs to know about this situation? I think that is one area that is incredibly important. You don't want word to spread. You need to make sure it's on a need-to-know basis. How you handle the aftermath of a fraud is just as important as every other component of your anti-fraud program. Following the investigation of a fraud, if you find something actually did occur, you need to make sure you have a plan to bake in what you've learned to improve your program overall. That looks like making sure that you are reestablishing trust with anyone who maybe isn't feeling that right away. It's making sure you are remediating any gaps, any control deficiencies, any areas where you were vulnerable and were not aware of it. It's making sure you communicate, this is what happens when fraud occurs at our organization and that we do not tolerate it, so that you help reinforce your culture of prevention and vigilance. It's making sure that you've informed all of the parties that need to be informed. And then it's making the hard decision on what you do to punish the perpetrator. Are you terminating them? Are you pursuing legal action against them? Those things also send a message back to the organization. Having a comprehensive anti-fraud program that includes not just how you respond to incidents of fraud, not just how you investigate them, but how you're preventing, detecting them, communicating them, all of that together really reinforces the objective of ensuring you have an ethical business that runs with integrity and ultimately can be as successful as possible. Thanks again so much for joining us. For more information, including the report to the nation's benchmarking study I mentioned, tools and resources specific to conducting fraud risk assessments, sample policies, and so much more, visit us at acfe.com.